Hello! Today in science, we'll be looking at an activity that is labeled Will Light Pass Through? It'll look at items that are translucent, transparent, and opaque. So that is the title of our activity today. The 5th grade standard that we will be looking at is a physical science standard. The standard statement is as states below. Light and sound are forms of energy that behave in predictable ways. So our activity today will be centered around this standard, and students will be able to fully understand this standard statement at the end of this activity. These are some questions that have come up that will be completely answered in this activity. These are questions that will get students thinking and will help them brainstorm before we start the activity. So what I would do is I would state all of these questions, and this would also be projected on the board. So these will be the questions that I will say to the students. What happens to light when shined on an object? Can light pass through everything? Why or why not? Does it depend on the light or the object if light passes through? So these are questions that will be up on the board, and students will already have their desks in groups, and students will turn to their groups and they will think through these questions. These questions will allow students to question and brainstorm and critically think together and come up with ideas and build off each other, and this will be a great thing for students to do with their groups before starting the activity. So it'll get their brains moving and get them ready for this activity. The next thing we will go over is some key vocabulary for students to know before we start the activity so that they're not confused. These are 3 words that they may be familiar with or they may not be, and if they are familiar with these, they'll just get a little reminder, but most students will probably not be familiar with these words. So the first word is translucent. Translucent is an object that lets some light through, but not all light. Transparent is an object that lets all light through. And opaque is an object that lets no light through. So these 3 things are things that we'll be looking at in today's activity. And these are great words to be familiar with before we move on. So I may have students practice using these words with each other and just going over these definitions, maybe coming up with their own definitions or writing them down, or just anything to get them to remember these words as we move forward. Then we are going to look at examples. So let's think. We're going to think about what are some items that allow all light through. This will be a time where students will be able to raise their hands and give some examples. So students might give examples like glass or windows, or maybe even clear containers, something like that. The next question will be one that students may have more trouble with. They may not, but if any of these 3, this will be the one that they struggle with. And the question is, what are some items that will allow some light through? Some students may struggle with this, but just because these items, they may not realize only let some light through without doing the experiment, but later in the activity, they will be able to experiment with this. But as long as students give a few examples just to get thinking, maybe they may say something like parchment paper, or they may say a Kroger bag, or they may say paper. They may say some things like this, but if they are stuck, this will be a great thing for them to review later in the experiment and remember, oh, this is something that lets sunlight through, or oh, I can't believe I didn't think about this. So that'll be a good question for them. And then the last question, or what are some items that will not allow any light through? Now this is one that I think students will have plenty of examples for. They'll say things like wood, or a chair, or cardboard, or honestly any object like a desk or anything like that they can think of. So the next time will be a time for students to come up with a hypothesis. So since we just came up with some examples, for those examples, I will not give any myself. I will let the students come up with them on their own, and I will not even say if they're right or wrong, but they'll be able to figure those out and see if those examples were true later in the experiment. But this is a hypothesis, and they're finding out the 3 objects that we'll be using. So the question will be, what item is translucent, which is transparent, and which is opaque? So the 3 items are cardboard, parchment paper, and glass. So students will write down, they will not say these out loud, they'll write down their guesses. So they'll write down cardboard, parchment paper, and glass, and they will say which one is translucent, which one's transparent, and which one is opaque. And this is another time that they will have to use what they know, what we just learned a few slides earlier about the vocabulary words. So they will have to remember those vocabulary words to be able to do this activity. So the next one, my video, oh, there it is. Perfect. Okay, this is since we're not in the classroom and I can't do this in real life, here's a video of me implementing this experiment as the teacher.
Item we're going to see if light travels through is cardboard. No light travels through the cardboard, therefore it's opaque. The next item is parchment paper. Some light travels through, therefore it's translucent. The last one is glass. All of the light travels through the glass, therefore it's transparent.
So if I was in person, of course, I would be doing that in real life. But since I'm not, there's the video.
Oh. First item we're going to see if...
So now students will be able to have their own turn at this. They'll be able to do this experiment on their own. But they will have to find 3 objects around the room, and this will be a great time for them to find the things around the room that were their examples in the beginning, and just to prove them, see if they actually are what they thought they were, if they were transparent or translucent or opaque. So each student will test those objects out once they already find them, and they will see if they were correct. This will get students up and moving. They'll be able to do this experiment on their own. It'll be awesome. So lastly, we will talk about our conclusion. So this is what we realized through this experiment. We realized that the traveling of light is predictable. We know that that light travels fully through some things, partially through others, and not through certain items. But it also depends on the item, if it is translucent item or transparent item or opaque. What we also know is that when light reaches a material, it is absorbed, refracted, reflected, or can continue to travel through. So this statement at the end of the conclusion just gets students thinking for the future, because we didn't go over all of these vocabulary words and they may not be familiar with all of these, but this specific experiment, we looked at light being absorbed into a material, or that it can continue to travel through. And what we will talk about a little bit is that some of the time, multiple things can happen. It can be absorbed, refracted, reflected, or it can travel through. Like some of these things can happen with one item, and sometimes one of them happens. So it just depends. And so this statement will just really get students looking to the future and remembering what they learned in this activity for the future and what we will learn next in science.